Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello and happy new year to you. I am offering this episode today as a gift to your future self, as a gift to who you're becoming this year, a woman with the most amazing, loving marriage that you love being in. And really as a step to let go of the old ways that were not leading you to having that loving marriage. So as the final episode in the 3-part series on really releasing control, releasing being controlling around things in your marriage, I invite you to really embrace the process that I'm going to share with you today about how to do that. So you can really leave that not so love-inducing habit of control in the past, right? In the past of who you were in the year 2021 as you step into this new year of 2022 and the year of the most glorious changes and deepest love emerging in your marriage. All right. So first thing I want to say is this episode builds on the last two. If you missed the last two, I highly encourage you to go back. You don't have to. I'm going to overlap a little bit of some of what I said then here, just a bit. I think it's always good to, it's never a bad thing to repeat ourselves when we're teaching something really important. Because I will say things in different ways today, and it will actually give you a fuller understanding of how to move out of this very common and majorly backfiring tactic in marriages, right? Again, which is control, or as I called it in the first episode in this series, kind of being more his mother than his lover. And so last week we discussed a way to accept really and make peace with just realizing that we don't actually really have control in general, even though we have this illusion that we do, right? But really making peace with sort of this overall sense that we don't have control over our partner in our marriages, so that we can actually move into having more influence over our experience in our marriage. And so last week we talked about that in sort of a somewhat generalized way. And today I want to offer you actually a little bit more of a concrete process, really for in the moments when there is an issue, when you find yourself wanting to control your husband or really anyone in a specific situation, right? Any adult. And other than maybe an employee is a little bit of a different situation. That's not what I'm talking about here. Before we dive into that exact process, I want to give you just a little brief maybe review and a little bit of background about control and just some major points that I have around it. So I have noticed in my years of working with highly sensitive people that we can have a tendency to be controlling of our partner. And it might not look exactly the way you think it looks. Again, I highly encourage you to go back to the other episodes to listen. I go into all of this at more depth in those last 2 episodes. Control can be really subtle, and it doesn't always really look like or seem like control at first glance. But I do want you to know it really does make sense that we might tend towards being controlling as highly sensitive people, and even as just humans in general, right? And really, it is a way of trying to take care of our sensitive selves. It's the only way we might even know how to really take care of our feelings, to get our needs met, to take care of the sort of the state of our environment, meaning like the house we live in, like the messiness in the house or whatever, right? In order to feel peaceful. Like we want to control the things outside of us so that we can feel peaceful. Because yeah, we do have deep feelings, right? And the bigger truth is that no one taught us how to steward our emotions, to be in charge and guide ourselves into feeling the emotions we want to feel, right? We were taught instead to try to steward others, i.e. control others, as a means of taking care of our own emotions, right? If we get this person to do this, if we get my honey to say, I love you, or pick up his socks, then I won't have to feel this way, or then I will feel this way, right? We think that if we can control the other person's actions or behaviors, then we'll feel better, right? So it's an attempt to take care of our own emotions, but maybe you've noticed it doesn't work so well. It doesn't work so well. Usually backfires in big ways, especially in a marriage. So I want to reiterate that we are not bad for trying to control. We're not bad at all. It's really, our urge to control comes from our own fears and lack of understanding about how to truly control or manage our own emotions. And it comes really from a fear of what will happen if we don't control the situation, right? From a fear of experiencing emotions we don't want to experience. When we get controlling, we're trying to take care of ourselves. We're trying to bring ourselves certain feelings, right? Like love and connection and peace, for example. Like one reason I hear from my clients that they like get mad at their husbands or try to get him to do a better job around, housework is because they want to feel more peace. And they think that making him pick up the house more or just having a cleaner environment is the key to feeling peace, right? It's not, I'll just say that, but we're all taught that that's how it works. So when we get controlling, again, we're trying to bring ourselves certain feelings and we're trying to avoid having to experience other ones, right? Like feeling hurt or sad or alone or all the things. So my bigger point of all this is we can be forgiving of ourselves if we tend towards control. This is a huge invitation for you to give yourself grace, to not get upset at yourself. Do not hold it against yourself if you find you might tend towards control. It does not make you bad. It's just a well-intentioned but really misunderstanding of how to bring yourself the feelings you want. Now, I'm the first to admit that I have had a controlling streak myself for a lot of my life. And it's simply because I have a fearful brain as a highly sensitive person. I have a sensitive brain that sees threats everywhere. This is normal for the highly sensitive brain. If you haven't yet listened to episode 6, it's like a total gotta listen to it. It's the two brains. I'm pretty sure it's episode 6. It's titled something about the two brains. Gotta go listen to that one to really understand that. But control comes out of fear, right? Like I've been saying, it's really key to hear this. Control comes out of fear. And as a highly sensitive person, we have a brain that is designed to see threats everywhere. So of course there's more fear. So of course there's this tendency to control. But controlling does not work well, right? It might get us something temporarily. For example, the socks picked up off the floor by your husband. But it ultimately leads us further from feeling like lovers with our partner. right? Like I said in the first episode, it leads us more towards feeling like their mother or being like their mother or them thinking of us as their mother or to more power struggles and really more of your partner feeling like the relationship he has with you is a job that he has to do, right? Instead of something he loves being in, instead of something he just gets to be him and feel free to be himself and loved for himself and just free to enjoy you in. So I have learned that what works way better than trying to control our partner in any shape or form is to take control of our own thoughts and feelings. This is the key, y'all, because this eliminates the need for trying to control others. And it also gives us more power to influence our marriage in the deeply loving direction we want it to go. So again, if you didn't go listen already to the last episode and the episode before that, highly recommended. Kind of talks about all of that more in depth so you really get it. But right now, I'm going to sort of dive into a concrete example from my own life, really to illustrate all of this or some of this and to talk you through the process that I would invite you to use to release control. So, for years, I have not really wanted my husband to drink beer multiple times a week. He likes his beer. He drinks it a few times a week. The controlling part of me is like, I don't like that, and has definitely told him to stop, complained about it, done all the control tactics to try to get him to stop. And because my brain thinks that if he stopped, I could avoid feeling worried about the future. I could avoid feeling fear now, right? My brain loves to extrapolate and really catastrophize about the future and about how if he drinks more than 2 beers a week, he'll end up an alcoholic and die young, and I'll be left all alone forevermore by myself. You see how dramatic our brains can be. This is our lizard brain. And yes, sometimes I still slip into believing these little thoughts that my lizard brain tells me, these fears. Yeah. And if I ever do fall into that, I sometimes still find myself, I've gotten so much better at this because of the process I'm about to teach you. But my instinct when I fall into this train of thought is to tell him to not drink beer. Again, complain about how it bothers me and just like act like critical and weird when he drinks beer. In other words, my instinct is to try to control his actions so that I don't have to feel fear. Yeah. Now I want to sort of make a side note here, which is that this is a confused instinct, right? Because it is not his actions that are creating my fear. This is where we all get snagged up. But listen, it is not his actions that are creating my fear. It is my thinking that's causing my fear. This is a huge understanding to grasp, and it has freed me so much, right? You heard me. My thoughts were, he'll end up alcoholic and die young if he drinks that beer. Right? Of course I feel fear if I'm believing that. Someone else could look at him drinking a beer and think nothing, or think, I like beer, and not have the feeling of fear whatsoever. Okay. So, the result of this in our relationship over the years in the past has been that he's kind of experienced me as nagging him and micromanaging him. At moments he's told me he thinks I'm being controlling. Well, that's because I am. Right? And that perception in him, that experience that he's having, it creates a whole other set of issues in our marriage, right? This dynamic leads to more conflict. It did lead to more conflict. Again, we're in a better place with this now. I've worked on this a bunch. But it's led to more conflict and discord for both of us. And really just this whole fallout, I'm sure I've talked about it in other places on this podcast, of just like he gets a little rebellious and there's like weird things that go on because of it. There's like basically disharmony is what the result is, right? And these other issues have left me in the past with not only the worry and the fear about, right, his drinking, but also a big dose of frustration on top and shame on top and feeling misunderstood on top, right? So this controlling thing doesn't actually make things better most of the time. It clearly can very much make things worse, right? Fear with all these other icky feelings to boot. So this is the cost of control in a marriage. And, everyone's relationship is going to show that a little bit differently. Some it won't be quite as hard on. Others it will be way harder on, depending on your partner, depending on, how much control is coming in, right? But there's going to be a cost, and that cost is going to be on the intimacy that you have with each other. So learning how to release control is a huge step towards gaining intimacy and harmony in your marriage. I like to think of this as instead of trying to control him, you use your energy to steward the ecosystem of your own mind and emotions. And as a result, steward your marriage into a realm of more love and respect and connection. Now, to be able to do that very masterfully, it takes more than one little tiny practice, right? And I do that deeply when I work one-on-one with my clients. We do that together. But having this little formal process that I'm going to teach you right now is awesome as a little starting place. And this is the process it was really a formal process that I implemented myself at first to stop trying to control my husband. And really it gets at the source of the need to control, right? Your fears. And it's really a process of looking at and making more peace with those fears, right? That keep you in control mode. So it's a really great step in the right direction. So here is the process to help you release control and gain back more loving agency, more stewardship over your own fears. And really, I suggest you try this out for a little while and decide after if you really need to try to control him. You can always go back to the old way. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Just do you like the results that it creates, right? So you can just decide if you want to go back to the old way of trying to control him, or if you find that it's better to control your own mind and your own fears and your own emotions, right? To steward your own emotions as I begin to teach you in this process. So this process is really 4 steps. Really, it's 4 questions. So I'm going to say them. I'm going to give you the 4 steps, and then I'm going to go back over them and explain them. So the first step is asking yourself, when you notice you are kind of moving into controlling, or you have this urge to control, or you start to say something that you notice is a little controlling, like in my example, hey, why you're drinking another beer? Are you having a beer again tonight? Right? That's such a sign. If I start saying something like that, I'm like, oh, there goes my controllingness, right? So first question is, what am I afraid of? Right? It's you just pause and you ask yourself, what am I afraid of? The second step is asking yourself, is that fear realistic? Third step is asking, is it worth the intimacy it will cost me to try to control him in this situation? If the answer is yes, you can just stop there. And go ahead and do the thing you were going to do, right? If, on the other hand, the answer is no, it's not worth the intimacy, it's going to cost me, you can ask yourself, can I be with these feelings of fear in order ultimately to have more intimacy with my own self and with him? Okay, those are the 4 steps. And I'm going to share a little bit more about exactly how to navigate them so you understand this more deeply and can go ahead into your life and use them. Use this process. So, first step, asking yourself, what am I afraid of? And again, this is just, you ask yourself when you notice this urge towards controlling something that's going on with your partner, right? And I want you to know it's always a fear here, right? If you have an urge to control, there's always an underlying fear. And again, it's going to be something about, something you don't want to feel in the long run, something you don't want to happen because you don't want to feel a certain way, or something you think you're not going to get to feel because something you think that will produce that feeling won't happen. That makes sense. So in my example, my fear is he'll end up an alcoholic and die young, and I'll be so sad and alone, right? So you can see that my fear is really of the feelings that I'm going to have. And maybe also the feelings I'm going to miss out on, which is ultimately like having him to love, having him around to love, and having him around to love me for long time, right? For many, many, many years to come, till I'm 95 or even older, right? I'm afraid I might not get that, right? So that's what I'm afraid of. So notice the thing that you're afraid of, like the actual event, right? And then also, like, what feelings are you afraid of having to feel or not getting to feel because of that happening? Yeah. Second step, asking yourself, is that fear realistic? And so when I ask this question, I like to just bring it back to the thing that might happen. Like, is it realistic that he's going to end up an alcoholic and die young? Right? Maybe. Sometimes maybe. But very, very likely not because of a few beers a week, right? Usually answering this one shows me that my fears are kind of like monsters under my bed, right? They're totally imaginary and totally like way out of proportion, right? And once we can see that, it's easier to just not be afraid and therefore not have that urge to control the situation. Again, our brains love to catastrophize and go to the worst case scenario really easily. And so often it's just blowing things way out of proportion. Our fears are way they're way magnified as to compare to what the realistic situation might end up being. So be on to yourself and check in. Is that fear realistic? Third step is asking, either whatever answer you get to the second question, you can move on to the third question. Is it worth the intimacy it will cost me to try to control him in this situation? So to answer this question, it can be useful to kind of study the effects or just review back times when you have gotten into a little bit of control mode. And again, this is where this episode ties back to the first one where I list a bunch of what control actually looks like. So you might want to go back and just take stock of like, do I control in these ways and what happens when I do, right? So you have a sense of like, this does bring us less intimacy, right? This does create issues for us. Right. And so then you'll have a little bit more of a solid sense of do I like that? And therefore, is it worth the intimacy? Is it worth the intimacy it costs me, right, to try to control in this situation? So I find for me, when I ask that question, like almost always the answer is no, especially not if my fear is unrealistic, as it almost always is, right? Sometimes my fear isn't unrealistic. Okay. Or sometimes I decide it is such a risk that I do think it's worth the intimacy it will cost. I think that's an interesting thing to just notice. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't ever control, right? You just want to be aware of what it creates and decide if trying to control him creates a result you like more than the intimacy that you could have without you trying to control him. Does that make sense? So is a place for control or trying to control our partner sometimes. You could decide. And if you choose it, sometimes that's totally fine. Just know that it comes with a trade-off, right? It comes with a loss of intimacy, usually, right? And sometimes it's worth that loss of intimacy for the moment, not like forever, right? And I want to give you an example of this, which is early in the pandemic, really in those very early days when everyone was like, what the heck is going on? Like, how do you get this thing? I told my husband that I don't want him doing errands, certain errands he wanted to do, and risking exposing himself and us to the virus, right? In that moment in time, the health of our family, to me, felt significantly more important, right, at that moment than feeling close to my husband, right? That was like sort of survival mode. So sometimes like being alive feels more important than intimacy, right? Totally valid. So we totally can choose intimacy, or we can choose control, or the illusion of control, right? Because we can't always control other adults. Anyway, my husband could have just gone and done his errands, even though I told him not to, right? Another way of putting this is we can choose intimacy, or we can choose fear. Sometimes fear is there for an important reason that's very truly protective of our survival. Most of the time it's not, and takes us very far away from thriving, right? Usually being ruled by fear isn't what we really want. So step 4 comes now. If the answer to the question 3 is no, it's not worth the intimacy, it will cost me to try to control the situation, you can then ask yourself, can I be with the feelings of fear? Can I be with the feelings of fear that are still here, the worries, and the way they show up in my body, in order to have more time now in loving intimacy with him? So the best news ever is that we can soothe our own feelings, right? And by one way is by, like in question 2, step 2, is questioning and changing our thinking, right? So that we don't feel the fear so much, right? When we asked in question 2, is that fear realistic? That's questioning and changing our thinking. We're like, oh, wait, maybe it isn't realistic, right? Oh, I see that that's not so realistic. It's just a monster under the bed. As soon as we see that, it takes the fire out of the fear, right? It makes it less gripping. All right. So remember, it's your thoughts that are creating the fear in the first place, right? And so this question, as well as other deep kind of inquiry into our beliefs, like I really do thoroughly with my clients, these things are so key for soothing and even eliminating altogether the fears that lead to controlling behaviors. The fears that ultimately, in other words, lead to disharmony and lack of intimacy and connection in our marriages. Okay, but sometimes the fear is still there, even if, we see it's not realistic, or if we can't see how it's not realistic, right? So then the extra step is this 4th question. It's really to open ourselves up to feeling the fear. Can I be with this fear, right? So the idea of making this kind of being with the fear, or what I call making direct contact with this feeling, can sound scary, right? If you've never had the experience of actually doing this. It's like, I just want to run away from the fear. I think that's a normal human instinct, right? So if you've never consciously allowed yourself to be with your fear, really in a way that feels more safe than it might sound right now, I want to point you to episode 37, where I go into more depth about this and I lead you through a process where you really get to experience how to feel and make direct contact and allow those feelings in a more peaceful way, in a safer way, in a healthy way. And it might be a little different than you think it is right now. But as you learn how to do this, really there will no longer be such an urgency to get away from the feelings that you used to try to avoid. Any feelings, really, but we're talking about fear here specifically, because that fear just won't feel so awful, right? You'll feel so much more comfortable and at ease with the fear, really able to allow these really inevitable feelings that we have as humans, right? To just kind of be there and then therefore to pass on by more easily. Really, this is very soothing ultimately. And when we can do this, we no longer have to try to mold our partner, right? To force him to do the things he doesn't want to do, to micromanage or control his actions, to tell him to not drink that beer, right? When I'm willing to allow my fear to be there and to love and comfort myself through it, really, I can let him enjoy the beers without telling him how I think he should do things differently, right? And he therefore can feel safer around me. He's not going to have to fend off my criticism and judgment. He can feel more respected and ultimately free to be himself, right? And I get to feel good for letting him be who he is. That feels good to me. And, I can also, if I choose to, I can also calmly and vulnerably share how my thoughts go to a fearful place when I see him drinking. And I can tell him that I'd love it if he wasn't drinking so often because I love and cherish him and I never want to lose him, right? I think I actually talked about this last episode with the peanut butter cup example, right? Like I can tell him that vulnerably so he can kind of see that I have fears, but it's very different than trying to control him from that fear. It's being transparent because I'm much calmer, right? It's easy to do that because I'm much calmer. And from that, like he'll be able to listen and hear me and understand me much better if I'm coming from that place, because I'm not just trying to dictate what he does. Right? And I'm able to speak with a tone and really a feeling, a tone that he can actually take in instead of just get defensive around. And he can actually really empathize with potentially, right? And when I'm telling him like that, like I love and cherish him and never want to lose him, right? He'll be able to hear my love for him and feel it, right? And that will create us being closer and feeling more connected. So this is the power of you stewarding your emotions out of fear, right? Soothing those fears and making space for that fear, right? This is all part of it. Stewarding them so that they are more soothed and so you are more calm. The power is more connection, more intimacy, right? More loving influence over your marriage. I think what's so interesting is so often in marriages, the reason we try to control is related to how much we want to feel these loving, good, just great feelings with our partner. We want to feel all the good things with him. And so we control to try to get them. But ironically, they take us farther away from that. But when we approach it this way, when we're taking agency, when we're stewarding over our own emotions, in other words, when we're controlling our own reactions and thoughts and feelings, we're able to guide our experience actually truly towards more love. And we give ourselves more time actually loving and being loved by this person. So if you also really want more time loving each other, you want more love in your marriage, and you find you tend towards control like I have, totally try this process out for yourself. Again, the steps are: step 1, ask yourself what you're afraid of. Step 2, ask yourself, is that fear realistic? Step 3, ask yourself, is it worth the intimacy it will cost me to try to control him in this situation? And step 4, if the answer is no, Can I be with the feelings of fear in order to have more time in loving intimacy with him? This process will really be a game changer in how good he feels with you and how good you feel about yourself and inside of yourself, and how much closeness grows between you. If one of the things that you want most is to have a marriage that feels so much more amazing than it ever has, you really want to feel the intimacy and love and connection blossom between you and your husband, and you want to feel good, so good about how you show up in your marriage, I invite you to make that so this year with my help. To learn more about exactly how we'll work together, you can head over to www.lifeisworthloving.com. You'll see a work with me page and details on how to take the next step. Let's get this New Year's and really renewed marriage off to a powerful and loving start. Be oh so well.